So today I'm here to talk to you about landing your next gig in tech. 10 million. That is the number of people in the US who lost their jobs just within a 2-week period when the pandemic started. The result was just a flood of new people all in the job market at the same time. However, businesses were also reducing the number of open positions to better cope with the economic hardships brought on by the pandemic. And for many people, that meant more competition for the available jobs. If you or your family were affected by it, I first just want to acknowledge that and say that, I'm really sorry to hear it. I personally know people who were negatively impacted by what took place during that time. But I hope that today's talk may be able to help you out, even if only in a small way. My aim is to help you stand out during your next job hunt. I'm Anise Davis, or Brown Girl Dev on Twitter. I work as an engineering director at Meetup, and part of my primary job responsibilities is the recruiting and hiring of engineers. During today's talk, I'm going to walk through each of the primary stages of the hiring funnel. I'll share the goal, best practice, and tips for how you can stand out, starting with your resume, the recruiter phone screen, the hiring manager phone screen, the tech phone screen, and then finally the onsite. To help make this talk more practical, we're going to base it on a fictitious job posting for a mid-level engineer at Star Electric. Now, I'm not going to read this word for word, but here's a quick highlight of the overview. So they're looking for someone who's going to collaborate closely with product and designers. They're going to be involved in the user experience, mock-ups through implementation. They need to be a fast learner who works independently. And then if we dig a little bit closer, they're going to look for 3 years of experience developing Android applications, familiarity with Jetpack components using Kotlin, Dagger Hilt, etc. Also, someone who's worked on multiple different types of Android devices. And then finally, we talked about this in communication, having excellent communication and organizational skills. The resume review is the first stage of the funnel. Typically, for a mid-level engineering position, you might have to compete with over 200 other applicants. The goal of this stage is to market yourself and get an interview. You successfully market yourself by making sure you include relevant projects in your resume, document what you're familiar with, like the different technologies, and then make sure your bullet points are succinct and metrics focused. Now let's look at an example. Here we have the resume of Mary Jones, and we'll look at each of the 3 sections, the objective, the skills, and the experience, to see how we can really help Mary to stand out. Starting with the objective. I want to work full-time as an Android developer. This objective tells the reviewer nothing about Mary that isn't already obvious. Of course, she wants to work full-time as an Android developer. She applied for the position, so we can do much better than this. Looking at this new objective, it really explains why you want this position. First of all, you're including the fact that you're experienced. You also, in the job requirements, it mentioned that they were looking for someone who could collaborate with design and backend. And then we have a few other keywords, the fact that they have a proven success record, they develop high quality products, and they want to work on a meaningful product. This is a very solid objective for someone's resume. Next, the skills section. So far, it's just a long list of expert at this and expert at that. First of all, it goes without saying that you shouldn't lie on your resume. If you're applying for a mid-level position, it's highly unlikely that you're an expert at everything already. What's more, it puts you in an awkward position later when it comes time to verify your employment, or even worse, you get the job, but you can't do the work. So stick with the facts. This is a much better format. It leaves out the proficiency level because that's going to be uncovered as you move throughout your funnel. Second, it's much easier to scan and see that those main job requirements have actually been met. And third, it just takes up less space on the page. so you can use it for more important things like your work experience. Speaking of experience, here's what we have from Mary so far: improving some test coverage, doing a multi-module app, and implementing new features and fixing bugs. It's pretty boring, and it's certainly not going to stand out to a reviewer. We need to give more. One of the best ways to structure the bullets in your job experience is to use this formula. I accomplished X as measured by Y by doing Z. Let's see an example. Contributed to transforming our app into a multi-module app. That's what we have so far. Instead, we're going to say, transformed our Android application into a multi-module app by introducing dynamic feature modules, which lowered our build times by 35%. Much better. When you formulate your bullets, make sure you use words that have power and grab the reader's attention, like sustained, formalized, orchestrated, transformed. Those things will really help your resume to stand out. We've updated Mary's resume to include the tips that we've shared. We even added in her GitHub handle and her LinkedIn URL. This resume is sure to stand out and make it to the next stage of the funnel. Think about it. Which of these tips can you apply to your resume right now? Once you've thought of something, make a to-do for yourself and don't forget to follow up. So for you, make sure you cover the requirements in the posting. Use action verbs and metrics. Include links to GitHub and any published apps that you may have, and then you'll be well on your way to the next stage of the funnel. And that is the recruiter phone screen. It's the initial impression you'll have on the company, and it's important that you know how to navigate this first step. The goal of this phase is to show the recruiter that you share the same values and that you'd be a good fit. Before having this interview, it's best to do your research on the company and think about potential questions that you want to ask. You'll also want to let the recruiter know about your desired salary and then show some sincere interest in the role and the company. Some examples of research to do during this phase is to look at various websites like their About Us page. You can read some articles on the blog, check out their social media accounts, do research on LinkedIn and Glassdoor. Just make sure that you really have a strong understanding about the company and maybe even your interviewer as a whole. Look, it doesn't help anyone for you not to say your salary requirements. The recruiter is looking for someone that meets their range, and you don't want to waste your own time for a job that's below your expectations. If you're not sure where to look for information about average salaries for your role and location, consider checking out some sites like levels.fyi, which allow you to easily compare salaries. Show some sincere interest in the company. You can do that by having your story, which is kind of like a prepared story, but not super rehearsed, of why you admire that company. Here's a personal example. As I mentioned, I work at Meetup. And during my interview, I had mentioned the fact that I moved abroad and my husband just was like, could not find anywhere to play basketball. And I told him, check out Meetup. They probably have something. And he did. And it turns out he found a really great basketball community on Meetup. And next thing I know, he's riding his bike all over Amsterdam playing basketball. And so that's one thing that I really appreciate about Meetup as a company, that it can help people find something that they love. So that's just an example of a story. Now, what are some other things that can help you to stand out to the recruiter? As I mentioned, make sure you do your research and also show that you're up to date with the latest technologies. Even though the recruiter may not know the nitty-gritty of some technical details, they do know some of the key buzzwords. So you want to be kind of like show that and show that you're serious about moving forward. The recruiter you interview with is often working with a specific timeline. Sometimes they might only have 2 or 3 weeks to fill the position. So don't waste your time or theirs. Be ready to move forward. Also, demonstrate some sort of intellectual curiosity. Maybe talk about a time where you introduced a new technology or process to your team that had an impact on results, and try to find a way to show that you're really a fast learner who could grow at the company. Now that brings us to the hiring manager phone screen. And this is my personal favorite because I get to chat with that person and learn more about their career journey and where they see themselves going next. And also whether or not they'd be a good fit for the team, and then vice versa. As the interviewee, you want to start building a relationship at this point. Whether it's fair or not, we hire people that we like and who can do the job. So, establishing a relationship with the hiring manager is important as they're often the final decision maker. And you can do this by being prepared for that tell me about yourself, demonstrating that you can actually do the job, and then effectively telling your story. And we're going to look at each of these things in a bit closer detail. So, starting by tell me about yourself. It's not just a time to read through your whole resume. Likely the hiring manager has already done that. Tell me about yourself is the same as convince me what it is about you that makes you the person for this job. It's your personal elevator pitch. You have 1 to 2 minutes to give an explanation of how you benefit the team and the organization. It's your chance to sell yourself. As an example, here's my personal elevator pitch. I'm a detail-oriented, impact-focused leader. I thrive in challenging environments and bring clarity to the ambiguous. I love to share what I learn with others. I use my ability to break complicated things down into simpler pieces to help elevate others, not only internal to my company, but also externally. Now, with just a few sentences, I have unveiled what it is that I bring to an organization. And you want to be able to have something very similar for your particular position or role. I also mentioned that you want to be able to tell your story. This is your chance to go beyond just being likable. You now need to demonstrate that you can do the job. For this, you'll want to have an example for each of the items in the job requirements if possible, because this is where your hiring manager is kind of looking to check those boxes and make sure they don't have any red flags about moving you forward. Just as an example, if the hiring manager says, well, tell me about that project when you were at ABC Studios, you could say, I converted the app from Java to Kotlin. Okay. Or you could say, oh, yes, ABC Studios, that was a great experience for me. That was the year that Google officially announced that Kotlin was a first-class language. I had the opportunity to convert our app from Java to Kotlin. In fact, we were running on both phones and watches at that time. Now, notice the difference. It's more conversational, and it addresses more of the items in the job requirements. Now, with the basics out of the way, if you really want to stand out during your hiring manager screen, download the app or at least check it out on the App Store before your interview. I can't get over the number of times that people have applied to a position as an Android engineer on my team who never even looked at the app, had no idea what the app did. That is definitely a red flag. Also, look the person up on LinkedIn. Find some common ground that you can talk to them about. And if you don't have any questions for them, it's going to come across as if you're not really interested in the job. So here's a sampling of a few questions that I personally ask when I'm interviewing. What's the ideal candidate like for this job? Can you please describe your leadership style for me? Well, what would my day-to-day responsibilities include? What's the rest of the team like? You learn a lot, and at the same time, you show your sincere interest in the company. So the tech phone screen. This is the phase where we get a chance to show our skill set to someone from the team that you'll be hired for. And it usually comes with some type of challenge in order to gauge your skills and give the employers an idea of how you would perform when given a task. The goal of this round is to highlight your technical skills and demonstrate how you would perform on the job. To improve on this, you want to really brush up on your technical skills. You'll either be given an algorithm to solve or perhaps a take-home coding challenge, maybe a live coding session. Either one, you need to prepare in advance so that it's easier for you to get through roadblocks. You also want to discuss your technical contributions. Make sure you've done some research on the latest technologies and at least experiment with a few of them, even if you have to do it on a side project, because you want to be able to discuss your prior projects and work experience. And then also have some questions ready. show some interest in their architecture and what they're currently doing and their challenges. So I'll ask you, what's your process like when you're preparing for the tech phone screen? Although I can't see your comments right now, I'm very curious. So please leave them in the chat and I'll be sure to check it out after the rest of this presentation. Whenever I had to prepare for some type of tech phone screen, I would try to visit some websites, find out about the latest guidelines and technologies because perhaps we weren't using those at my current company. Then I would try to work on a sample project. It could be things like using Jetpack components, coroutines, work manager, etc. Also attend some events where you can connect with other folks that are in the industry and maybe they can give you some tips as well. And as I said, try things like code labs where you can expand on some new technologies. Just as an example, here's the code lab showing how to use Kotlin coroutines in your Android application. So even if you're maybe still using RxJava or some other technologies for asynchronous programming, you can at least have the bare fundamentals in mind as you go to this interviewing process. And for algorithm questions, you may want to check out some websites like LeetCode or HackerRank in order to practice your problem solving skills. As a heads up, many companies will have you add a new feature to their application as part of the challenge. So it's a good idea to make sure you've actually used their product. I have a friend, she works at iHeartRadio, and when she was going through the technical phase, they asked her to design a system for organizing songs. So I've seen something very similar at many different companies. For the tech phone screen, though, it's very important that you're able to discuss your solution. This gives the person interviewing you a little bit of idea of your thought process and allows them to see how you would work through a problem. Now, to stand out in this phase, you need to be able to discuss your solution and the thought process. If you're able to finish the entire thing before the time is up, maybe you could try to aim for some bonus points, clean the code, write some unit tests, enhance the UI, whatever you can think of in order to maximize your time during this tech screen. Also, be prepared for questions that you just don't know the answer to. So instead of saying like, look, I don't know, wait, what happened? There we go. Okay. So instead of saying, I don't know, you could say, well, I don't have much experience with that, but I do know blank. That way you're still answering the question and demonstrating your skill set. Now, these days, you're probably doing an on-site virtually, so I wanted just to share some tips that can assist you with this type of interviewing. Obviously, the goal here is to land the job. So what can you do? First of all, tailor your response to the interviewer's role. As you've learned so far, there's many different roles available. Be personable, but professional. And then prepare in advance for any extra technical exercises. So let me ask you, how long does it take someone to make a hiring decision? What do you think? 30% of people interviewed in one survey said they make a hiring decision within the first 15 minutes of talking to someone. Since that's the case, you really need to make the most of this time and get started off right. One of the best things you can do is tailor your response to the interviewer's role. The recruiter has a slightly different goal than the hiring manager, which also differs slightly from the engineer in the tech phone screen. You want to demonstrate to all of them that you're a good fit for the role and the company so that when they come back together, they're all having kind of very similar positive things to say about you and your interview. And if you're having the on-site virtually, be professional. Make sure your video background isn't busy and distracting. Still dress appropriately, at least up top. You want to show that you're taking this seriously. Finally, make sure you're prepared for any final technical exercises that you might have to participate in. Often there's going to be some whiteboarding exercise or maybe pairing on a tech problem with an engineer on the team. You want to ask in advance what the entire on-site process is going to look like so that you're not surprised the day of. To stand out during your on-site, make it a conversation. Ask and answer questions of your interviewer. Provide supporting evidence for the things that you say. Think about 3 main situations that you can apply to a variety of circumstances. It could be things about where you were presenting at work, you led some effort somewhere, a coding project where you were the lead. Just make sure you have these 3 scenarios in mind, and then you can kind of talk very confidently and naturally during your interview. Also, keep it positive. If they say, "Why are you looking?" It's because you like new opportunities. Don't harp on the perks. Find out about community reimbursement after you have a job offer. This is a time where you want to be positive and put your best foot forward. Now, what if you've been in the industry for a while and you're trying to get like a senior level or management type position? Well, you'll have to approach things slightly different. You'll want to think more about the behavioral aspects of the interviews and make sure you communicate effectively. For this, you'll use the STAR method to address behavioral questions like, tell me about a time when, what's your greatest weakness, etc. And you can do that by preparing in advance. So let's use this example. Tell me about a time when you made a mistake. So first of all, brainstorm a few examples of particular scenarios in your previous job and think through how you can discuss that scenario using the STAR framework. So to answer this question, I'll use an example from my friend. I accidentally overwrote my coworker's code. So this statement could be the situation. The task, having to get the coworker's changes back. The action, stayed up late and retrieved the work. The result, the work was retrieved. So if we put it all together into the tell me about a time when you made a mistake, it could be something like this. Well, there was this one time when I overwrote my coworker's work inadvertently since we were working on the same branch. The release was the next day, so I had to act fast and get those changes back. I decided to stay up late and I was able to fix it. This allowed me to get the branch back in the proper state just in time for the release. So just like that, you've handled the tell me about a time when using the STAR framework. And that's it. We've gone through each stage of the hiring funnel. I hope that you learned at least one thing that will help to improve your next job search experience. When you put these techniques into practice, you can definitely look forward to getting hired. Thanks a lot. I have links to some resources and slides you can find here. I'm also going to share this on Twitter at BrownGirlDev. So I will stop share and take a look at.
I know we've got one question here, so I'll pop off here and.
Okay, so far I only see one question here, and it is, how can I practice interviewing and find out what questions I may be asked? Okay, that's a great question. So what I would recommend you do is actually try to apply for a job that maybe you don't necessarily want. Just so you can get in the habit of interviewing, especially if you haven't been doing it for a while. Many of the questions and the approach it's very similar between various companies. So that's one thing, is to just actually go on an interview. There's something called mock interviews. So you can kind of reach out and look online. Some of the websites that I mentioned, and I also linked to the resources, offer mock interviews. You can maybe try to reach out to your network and see if anyone would be willing to practice doing an interview with you as well. So those are just some suggestions on how you can practice interviewing before you actually apply for a job you actually really, really want to get. Okay, I will wait a moment and see if there's any more questions come in. Otherwise, that's the only question that I see in the Q&A. Okay. All right, maybe that's it for me, Greg. Okay, wait. I see one more. How do you know you are ready for interviews, or for which level? How do you know you're ready for interviews? I guess I'm not fully sure what that means. But if you're, let's say I'll focus on which level. My recommendation is to pull a bunch of different job descriptions online and then go through each of the bullet points and see where you measure up. So one thing I do sometimes with some of my reports is I'll pull job interviews for the next level that they want to get to. And then we'll go through and we'll do a red, yellow, green exercise and say like, okay, where are you on this one? Are you able to communicate effectively with leadership? Are you able to technically document your architecture diagrams, etc.? So that's the best way to know, okay, where am I as far as red, yellow, green on the level that I'm trying to get at? If you have more reds and yellows, then you're probably not ready for that position. And I would go one position down. Okay, cool. More questions. This is great. So the next question is, what is the number one failing you see in overall qualified candidates? Okay. The number one failing I see is that people are not able to communicate effectively. Even though they may have the number of years experience and they may even know some of the technologies that we're using, they don't do a good job explaining their thought process. They don't do a good job explaining how they directly had an impact on the team or the organization. So the number one failing I see is in communicating their direct impact as an engineer. Okay. And then the next question I have is, how do you suggest going about interviewing while working full time? Yeah, it's really tricky. As much as possible, I try to request interviews in the middle of the day or early or in the evenings. And then if it comes time to being like on site, then I just take off from work. Okay. And another question, how do you know you're ready for interviews? I mean, for the technical part. Okay. Yeah. So you would know if you're doing well on some of those exercises on LeetCode, HackerRank, and if you've successfully completed a few of the code labs for whatever industry you're trying to be in. So like I'll assume it's probably Android here. I will go to the Kotlin code labs and I would try to make sure I'm familiar with much of what's there. And if I am, then I'd feel like, okay, cool, I could survive a technical phone screen. Okay. How do you feel about candidates reaching out to a hiring manager directly over a recruiter in an attempt to make it past the void of rejection from automated systems? Okay. Um, it depends on the hiring manager. I appreciate when people reach out to me directly, or even sometimes people want to chat just informally before getting in the official process, especially if the company maybe has to fulfill a lot of roles or certain times of year, there's a lot of pressure to fulfill roles. So I think it's okay to reach out to the hiring manager directly, especially if they're the person who posted the position on like LinkedIn or Twitter, etc. All right. That's all I see in the Q&A. But as I mentioned, I'll make sure I put this on Twitter as well.
Annie's, every time I think we've just
I
wrapped it up. So I'll take this time and maybe that'll, go ahead.
Okay. This last question. All right. I have 15 years of software development experience, firmware, low-level code. I've been learning Android on my own, how to break into the field and land that first job. Okay, that's a great question. And one thing I recommend is to build up your online portfolio of sample projects. At least be able to do that and you may have to start as like a junior Android engineer, but if you have a few sample projects to show like your experience there, and then since you have so much just like overall experience, I'm hoping that also would translate into you being a good communicator and a fast learner and being a flexible person. And that will outweigh, wherever your failings are on the Android side. I mean, because it's just a framework like many things. And so no doubt you'll be able to succeed.